Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. On the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent, and looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We now explore after a hiatus, after a summer vacation, we now explore the West African country of Burkina Faso. And who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and anti-imperialist activist, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire, and also a frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide on this trip to Burkina Faso's history and current affairs. So Abayomi, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for your continuing interest in African history and African affairs. It's very, very important during this time period.
Well, as always, thank you very much for that, Abayomi. And as always, it's always an honor and a real privilege to have you on as our history teacher. So all my thanks and appreciation for the time you give us. And actually, just before we get into it, apologies, folks. We were supposed to do a recording and release of an episode of One Plus One this past Wednesday, but my guest fell ill, so we're postponing that. But hopefully, once that guest is better, I promise to deliver a very good episode. And the only thing I'll say about that episode is that the topic will be about historic Palestine and Lebanon, and that's all I'm going to reveal. And as always, folks, please donate generously to Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports, and please donate generously if you can to One Plus One. Share all of our content, past and present. Help us overcome the far-right algorithms and help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and state media has in the social media world by sharing all of One Plus One's content and, again, donating to us. And the last 2 weeks, I was able to share my content widely on Facebook. But that being said, in case I still have problems, I would really appreciate if folks really do share all of One Plus One's content. Because, you know, if we're unable to grow the audience and so forth, then might have to stop doing One Plus One. But now, on to the topic at hand. So Abayomi, Burkina Faso, as always, tell us, what was Burkina Faso like before French colonization, and what were the conditions of the people when France colonized Burkina Faso? Yeah, Burkina Faso.
The area where Burkina Faso is located in West Africa has a long historical tradition. You can trace human settlements, tools in that particular region of the African continent going back thousands of years. In fact, anywhere between 14,000 and 5,000 before the Christian era, there is material evidence of human settlements and also tools in those areas. Even from 3600 BC to 2600 BC, there's also additional evidence of agricultural settlements. So you have both hunting and gathering societies as well as more sedentary or agricultural-based societies. One of the early cultures in that particular section of West Africa is the Boer culture. And this stems from discoveries from an archaeological site in the lower Niger River area. It covers Burkina Faso as well as Niger. So when we look back historically, we can see that these countries that were carved up as a result of enslavement and colonialism never existed prior to the colonial period. The areas of control and settlement and civilization were much broader and were becoming even larger prior to the advent of enslavement and colonialism. Now, there was an Iron Age civilization in that particular region of the continent. There was the Boer Ascende culture as well, which developed later. And this was an Iron Age civilization as well. This can be dated back to the 3rd century AD, during the so-called Christian era of world civilization. Now, during the period of the 15th during the period of the 5th through the 15th century, there was the development of the Maasai kingdoms or Maasai civilizations. There were several kingdoms that developed in the area today known as Burkina Faso, Niger, and other areas. These kingdoms included the Tinkandogo, the Yatinga, Zandoma, and the Ouagadougou kingdoms. There was also a period in the early 14th century when the Maasai and the Songhai became competitors for control of that particular region, specifically under Sunni Ali, who was a great Songhai leader. The Guarico kingdom was also another civilization that existed during the 18th and 19th centuries, right on the eve of the consolidation of colonial rule by France and Britain in that particular area. And the Maasai and the Songhai under Sunni Ali, as I mentioned before, had been competitors. Also, it was founded, the Ouattara kingdoms were very, very prominent in that particular period in West Africa. There was also the Kong Empire, which existed between 1710 and the late 19th century, around 1898. It was also known as the Ouattara Empire. This encompassed areas today which are considered Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and parts of Mali, as well as Ghana. So there were tremendous levels of human settlement, hunting and gathering societies, agricultural societies, and monarchical feudal kingdoms, which existed in that region of West Africa between the periods of 14,000 to 5,000 BC in regard to human settlements, and then in more recent periods, the development of feudal societies, which existed after the so-called beginning of the Christian era, all the way up until the 19th century. Now, the Gwembe Ouattara was a civilization that existed between 1836 and 1919. It was headed by a woman by the name of Gwembe, and she was a military leader in what is today known as Burkina Faso. This is way back between 1836 and 1919. She formed an alliance with Samori Touré, and they collectively fought against French imperialism. Yeah, we talked about Samori Touré in a previous episode. He was a legendary anti-colonial fighter in the area around today's Guinea-Conakry, and fought for decades against French imperialism. So these are some of the civilizations, some of the developments that existed during that particular time period. The Maasai became isolated by the end of the 19th century, around 1896. And this led to the Franco-British Convention that was signed on June 14th of 1898. It created the modern boundaries involving French as well as British imperialism in West Africa. Prior to that, of course, there was the Berlin West Africa Conference that took place in 1884 and early 1885, which set in motion the formal classical form of colonialism in Africa, which prevailed all the way up until the mid and sometimes the late 20th century. So these are some of the issues that were involved, even after the French took over and Burkina Faso became part of French West Africa. There was resistance that took place during that time period. There was the Volta Bani War, which took place during World War I and involved thousands of Africans who fought against the French imperialists. This is during World War I.
Wow.
It must be viewed within the context of the First Imperialist War, which took place between 1914 and 1918. Now, you hear people falsely claim that there was very little resistance to the First Imperialist War in Europe and other parts of the world. But that is definitely not the case. There was resistance. Even here in the United States, thousands of people went to prison. They were censored. Many more were deported because they opposed U.S. military intervention in World War One. In Africa, in Nyasaland, which was a British colony in the southeast part of Africa, there was a rebellion which took place in 1915, headed by a man by the name of Chilembwe, and that was in response to the forced conscription of Africans into the British military during World War One. We had a similar situation in Burkina Faso and in other parts of West Africa when people between 1915 and 1917 rose up against the French imperial rule in Burkina Faso. And of course, this was related to the forced conscriptions as well by France for Africans to fight on behalf of French imperialism in the First War. Now, we know about these Senegalese rifles. That was a African military unit that was established, and they forced Africans in Senegal and some other West African states that were controlled by France to fight on the side of the French during World War One.
Yeah.
And some of them even had contact with the African American soldiers that landed in France beginning in 1917 and in 1918. Now, these Black soldiers, a lot of them were called the Harlem Hellfighters, fought valiantly on behalf of U.S. imperialism, but they were treated like garbage by the U.S. government. They were never officially recognized for their contributions to the war effort. And what's interesting about World War One is that by the time the United States got in, the war was well underway. There was a lot of opposition in the U.S. against the war, even among ruling class elements. Yeah. People like, for example, in 1914, 1915, even industrialists like Henry Ford I were opposed to the U.S. entering World War One. Now, why was this? Not because they were anti-imperialists. They thought that with millions of workers being recruited into the military machine, it would destroy their workforce. It would dampen their capacity to industrialize in the United States. And that was during the early decades of mass production and heavy industrialization. In Detroit, right here, where I'm speaking from, they began the mass production through the assembly line, right over in Highland Park. That building is still there today, even though it's in horrendous condition, but it's still there. And it's interesting that the Ford family or their foundations have not renovated that building. That's the first building where you had mass production and you had an assembly line in the entire world. And Ford began to churn out all these automobiles, and the fact that they engaged in mass production, the people who worked for the company were able to buy vehicles that they produced. So this led to the boom in the automotive industry and other industries in the United States. So they were opposed to the war, but then Woodrow Wilson convinced them that they could make money, a lot of money, off imperialist war. So once they were convinced, they were all in favor of the war, and they produced a tremendous amount of war machinery, and that's how the war proceeded. But that war was critical. If we know that the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917 occurred during that time period, the first revolution that brought workers and peasants to power in any state. So World War I was very, very important for the anti-colonial struggle. So after as time proceeded, during the 1940s, of course, Hitler and the Germans went in and took over France. And there was an alternative government that was established known as the Free French government, headed by Charles de Gaulle. Now, in 1944, we discussed this before, they had a conference in Brazzaville in what is today the Republic of Congo, where they reconfigured the colonial system as far as France was concerned over the African continent. So by the period of 1944 to 1958 was a period of reorganization of colonialism in the post-World War II period. So in 1958, this territory that is today known as Burkina Faso, then it was known as Upper Volta. Yeah. And Upper Volta, of course, was part of the French colonial system in West Africa. So in 1958, de Gaulle once again came up with another scheme to extend French colonial influence and control in West Africa. And they had a referendum in 1958 where people could have, quote, self-rule, unquote, pending independence. And all of the French colonies at that time were able to vote in favor of this proposal by de Gaulle, with the exception of Guinea, under the Democratic Party of Guinea, under Secretary, and also Algeria, which was involved in an armed revolutionary struggle against France. That took place between 1954 and 1962. And then Cameroon, of course, as well, which we talked about earlier. They embarked upon an armed struggle in order to get genuine independence. Unfortunately, though, the leadership of the Cameroonian People's Union were assassinated by French intelligence operatives between 1958 and 1960. So in 1960, Upper Volta became an independent state, along with a lot of other former French colonies on the African continent.
And was it a peaceful transition or one of violent struggle when Burkina Faso became independent?
It was largely a political struggle that took place, and a man by the name of Maurice Yamiogo became the first elected head of state in Upper Volta. He was a right-wing oriented political leader, and he remained in power for approximately 6 years. And his influence stemmed from French imperialism and anti-communism. And that was the situation in Upper Volta during the early phase of the independence struggle between 1960 and 1966. And as I mentioned before, Yamiogo was a staunch anti-communist. Now, what was happening in West Africa during this particular time period? In 1960, of course, is considered the, quote, year of Africa, unquote, where approximately 16 African states gained their independence. A lot of them were French colonies, but some, and one in particular, was the Belgian Congo, where the Mouvement National Congolais under Patrice Lumumba organized a movement, nationwide movement. And by the end of 1959, they had set a date for the holding of elections. And of course, the elections took place. And on June 30th of 1960, the country was declared independent under Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. Well, we know what happened after that. Lumumba was isolated. He was overthrown. His government was essentially nullified. He asked for the United Nations to come into Congo to help stabilize the situation. But at that time, the US and Britain and other imperialist countries had total control of the peacekeeping apparatus of the United Nations. And they used their United Nations forces, even the African troops, to stifle,
sabotage,
and frustrate and undermine the MNC government in 1960. So Lumumba left the capital of Leopoldville at the time, and eventually was abducted and arrested, tortured, and executed. Now, in response to that, the newly independent African states, there were two fundamentally different positions that were taken. In Nkrumah, Ahmed Sékou Touré, and Modibo Keita of the Ghana, Mali, Guinea Union pushed the position that Africa has to unite as soon as possible, because no African state, so-called independent African state, is safe based upon what had happened in Congo. You know, people were being killed. The military took over at the aegis of Mobutu Sese Seko. They had some other political leaders who were basically puppets of Belgium and the United States. But in essence, the army that was being propped up by US imperialism and the other imperialist states became the de facto legal and political system inside of Congo. So one response came from a group that was labeled the Casablanca Group. Now, this group was anti-imperialist, and they were for African unity. But there were others, a lot of whom got their independence in 1960, held a conference in Monrovia and another one in Brazzaville, and they became the Monrovia Group, which was the former English-speaking colonies, and the Brazzaville Group, which was the French colonies, former French colonies, which were more allied with the West, more moderate, and did not favor an immediate move towards the United States of Africa. So this split the African continent in 1961, 1962. There were efforts.
And Burkina Faso was part of that.
That
was more oriented with the West. That thought that let's continue to have relations with France, even though it's a very unhealthy relationship.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what happened was in 1961, 1962, as the situation deteriorated in Congo and other African states, leaders such as Sékou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah set out to bring about some type of unity, even though these divisions were quite stark at that time. And also, what was interesting about that period of time was that there were divisions between the former French colonies and the British colonies in West Africa. For example, there was tension between Ghana and Upper Volta in 1962. In fact, there was an assassination attempt against Kwame Nkrumah in August of 1962 when he had traveled to the northern regions of Ghana. And as a result of that assassination attempt, Nkrumah was injured. He was slightly injured, but there were others that were killed, including children. And in response to that, there was a huge purge within the Ghana government and the ruling party of the Convention People's Party. So with all this going on, people like Sékou Touré of Guinea and Modibo Keita of Mali and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana began to have back-channel communications with the more moderate and conservative governments in Africa, where by the beginning of 1963, when there were approximately 33 independent African states, they made a decision to form the Organization of African Unity. And this summit was set for May 25th of 1963. Now, Yamiogo, he was a right-winger, but at the same time, he did want to have some form of normal relations with some of these left-wing states. But a lot of them did not trust him, and because of his rightward-leaning political orientation. So that's what happened in that particular regard. There was close ties between Yamiogo and other former French colonies in West Africa. You know, for example, Yamiogo made an alliance with Félix Houphouët-Boigny of Ivory Coast, who was an extreme right-wing leader who opposed socialism and who opposed any type of movement towards the United States of Africa. And he was also brought to the United States under Lyndon Baines Johnson on a state visit. This was in March and April of 1965. Now, at this time period, this is when Johnson had escalated the U.S. military intervention in Vietnam. So you can see some of these historical parallels that took place. There was a whole question of, he was given 3 billion CFA francs to split with Ivory Coast and Niger under the current government that existed at that time in Burkina Faso. So all these things were going on. So by January of 1966, the economy started to deteriorate in Burkina Faso, and Yamiogo was met with mass demonstrations and industrial actions, and he eventually was overthrown by the military in early 1966. Now, he was arrested and he was also put on trial, held in detention for a considerable period of time. That was in January of 1966. The next year, February of 1966, well, let's go back 1 month. Nigeria, which is an English-speaking country, experienced its first military coup d'etat.
Yeah.
In January of 1966. Then there was another one later that year, in June of 1966, a second military coup in Nigeria. So we've had the advent of these military coups in Congo, with Mobutu in September, October 1960. Later on, there was assassination of Olympio in Togo. And in 1966, of course, the first coup d'etat in Nigeria, and then a coup d'etat in a former French colony of Upper Volta, and that took place in early 1966. So you had these demonstrations, you had labor activity, you had demonstrations among students, and that led to the takeover of the country by the military in early 1966. And he was forced to resign, Yamiogo, as a result of the military coup. So Lieutenant Sangile Lamizana's government was in power up until 1980. So it was a military government between 1966 and 1980. And Colonel Zarba was also the leader up until November 25th of 1980. So,
and before we talk about the 1980s, talk about Burkina Faso in the 1970s. Did the new military government, did they break away from the right-wing trajectory of the first Burkina Faso independence leaders, or not so much?
No, not so much. They still pretty much remained in the Western camp. And even though they came to power as a result of complaints over the deteriorating economic situation, the lack of democracy, problems with the educational system, but even under the military, there were very few changes in regard to the overall political orientation of the state. And yeah.
Oh, then that's actually. Finish with what you're going to say before I get to my question about Thomas Sankara. So go right ahead.
Yeah, well, in 1980, there was another military coup, and this was carried out on November 25th of 1980 by Colonel Zayi Zarba, and he served for 2 years. He faced opposition from the trade union movement. He was overthrown in 1982 by Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo of a group called the Council of Popular Salvation. That was in 1982. He stayed in power for about a year. And then after that, Thomas Sankara, who had been incarcerated, his comrades gathered around him and they took power during 1983. This proved to be a pivotal point in the transformation of from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso,
fascinating, and actually, and that's a perfect segue to this.
Yeah.
So talk to us. So talk to us a bit more about what led to the rise of Thomas Sankara, who I'm wearing a shirt of. I got it at the Anti-War Cafe in Berlin, which is run by Hans, who runs the Berlin chapter of World Beyond War. So shout out to them.
Okay.
So talk to us.
Nice shirt.
Thank you, and
yeah.
Yeah, so talk to us about what led to the rise of Thomas Sankara, and tell us about his governance of Burkina Faso during much of the fourth and final chapter of the Cold War, as he was president from 1982 up to 1987. And then my only follow-up question to that is talk to us about his legacy, which I think it's safe to say was largely positive. And I spent last night so watching three documentaries about Thomas Sankara, and it's safe to say that although it's safe to say that his legacy in Burkina Faso and even much of the continent is largely positive. So talk to us about all of that.
Yes, and he's regarded in a similar fashion as Che Guevara is, as it relates to the Cuban Revolution and revolutions in Latin America and Africa as well, because Che Guevara, of course, fought in Congo during 1965 in an effort to overthrow neocolonialism there. It was not successful then, but in later years, a lot of the groundwork that he laid did bear fruit. But I think that Thomas Sankara had been in the military. He had trained in France, and while there, he joined a Marxist study group. And a lot of his politics were derived from Marxism, Leninism, and Pan-Africanism during the 1970s and early 1980s. So yes, he did have a background in revolutionary politics, and he was committed to the revitalization of Upper Volta and the land of the upright people, which what Burkina Faso translates in English was the name that was selected for the country, and to leave Upper Volta behind, which represent colonialism and the French domination of the country. Although neocolonialism was very strong during the 1980s, during that in West Africa, French neocolonialism, because in 1984, Ahmed Sékou Touré, who was president of the Democratic Party of Guinea and the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea, died suddenly of a heart attack. Well, he had a heart attack in Saudi Arabia, and then he was flown to the United States to the Cleveland Clinic for heart surgery, and he died, according to reports, on the operating table in Cleveland in late April of 1984. Now, he was flown back to Guinea for his state funeral, and the day after, the army, some lower-ranking military officers seized power and overthrew the PDG and instituted, a French neocolonial dominated regime. After 26 years of the PDG being in power, remember they were the country that voted against the Lloyd Cadre referendum, voted against the so-called self-rule proposal by de Gaulle, and struck out on its own in 1958 and declared itself anti-imperialist and socialist-oriented, and of course formed the alliance with Ghana and Mali, along with Guinea, and played a key role in the development of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. So Sankara in Burkina Faso was extremely isolated. If you look at the governments that were in power during that time period across West Africa, overwhelmingly, most of them were closely allied with France, possibly with the exception of Benin. Now, what happened between 1984 and 1983, when Sankara came to power? The name of the country was changed, I believe, in 83 or 84. And he set out to institute reforms, climate change, for example. Probably one of the first countries on the continent to address the issue of desertification and the lack of water and other issues involving the problems with wildlife involving West Africa. He also discussed the liberation of women, that Africa needs to break, with the traditional patterns of gender relationships. They need to break with the patriarchy that was inherited by French imperialism. And he called for the abolition of the debt in a similar fashion that Fidel Castro had some years earlier. He said that the debt was illegitimate and it should not be paid, and that France should cancel the debt of his former African colonies. So these are some of the issues that he talked about. He wrote and spoke extensively, and his articles were published internationally. So yes, that was some of the contributions that Thomas Sankara made during his short tenure as head of state in Burkina Faso. Now, they were under tremendous pressure. They had economic problems. And there were elements in the country around the university, for example, and around some of the trade unions in the country, which objected to some of his policies. And as a result of that, it caused friction within the Burkinabe military, particularly between Thomas Sankara and his sidekicks, Blaise Compaoré. Now, Compaoré wound up marrying a woman from neighboring Cote d'Ivoire. I believe she was a relative of Félix Houphouët-Boigny. If not, she was very close to his administration. And as a result of his wavering politically, Thomas Sankara, along with a number of his other comrades, were executed in October of 1987. And Blaise Compaoré took over and reverted back to the tradition of the French and world-dominated neocolonial system of governance. And that happened after 1987. It went on for many, many years.
Before we talk a bit more about Blaise Compaoré, is there anything else about Thomas Sankara's policies that you think needs to be studied that's helped overnight change the country? And during this period, what were Burkina Faso's relations with Western imperial nations like France, the U.S., the U.K., Canada, Western Europe, and its relations with the USSR and the Eastern European socialist blocs and others? I'm curious your response.
Yes, they were close with Cuba, with the socialist countries, but they had very strained relations, particularly with France and also with the United States. I mean, it is speculated, and there's evidence to suggest that France played a key role in undermining the government under Thomas Sankara, and also bringing about his overthrow and execution, because relations between Compaoré and successive French governments were very, very close. And he repudiated the socialist-oriented policies of Thomas Sankara, and that was the situation in Burkina Faso for many, many years after that.
And as you mentioned, sadly, Thomas Sankara, like many leftist leaders and movements, was sabotaged. And in his case, he was murdered for his defiance against neocolonialism and imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, well, you already sort of talked about, but talk about it a bit more. Talk about what led to his coup, who backed the coup, and then talk to us about Burkina Faso under the Western-backed supported leadership of Blaise Compaoré, who governed Burkina Faso during the period of the end of the Cold War and the unipolar period led by the U.S. and its allies, notably Britain, France, the EU, Canada, etc.
Yeah, the relations were strained during the period of the National Council of the People government of Thomas Sankara. And as I mentioned, he came to power on August 4th of 1983. So that was the problem that he faced, being a landlocked, impoverished state that had very poor relations with the former colonial power, that had a split within the ruling elements inside the country. And this led to an economic deterioration, to political instability, and eventually the coup d'etat and the execution of Thomas Sankara. But his work, though, still lives on today. We're talking about some 42 years later that he came to power. He was overthrown in 1987. So we're talking about, what, 38 years it's absolutely amazing that he has still maintained such a level of political stature worldwide, not just in Africa, but also worldwide since 1987.
Yeah, if there was ever going to be sort of an African Mount Rushmore celebrating great leaders of Africa, I think safe to say Kwame Nkrumah, he would be there. Patrice Lumumba would definitely be there.
Exactly.
I and definite Julius Nyerere. I think his name,
Yeah.
his face, should definitely be there. Then you would definitely have to put Thomas Sankara,
Most
Thomas.
definitely.
And
Yes.
yeah, and talk to us a bit more about Burkina Faso under Blaise Compaoré, who governed Burkina Faso during much of the '90s, the rise of the unipolar world, and talk to us a bit more about that before we talk about the 2000s and 2010s.
Yeah. In October of 1987, there was the coup, and there was the immediate reversal of all the programs and projects that Sankara and his government had instituted. There was a rapprochement with France, and that's the way the situation continued. Very limited democracy, reactionary politics and alliances in Africa as well as internationally. And this went on from 1987 all the way to 2014. And in 2014, it appeared to be spontaneous, but I think it just grew out of the horrendous, deteriorating social conditions inside of Burkina Faso. There was a huge uprising in 2014, and it led to Blaise Compaoré fleeing Burkina Faso. He fled the country because people were out to punish him for not only overthrowing the Sankara government and executing Sankara, and then lying, about what actually happened on that fateful day in October of 1987. So he fled the country, and it created a lot of chaos and turmoil, but it also brought about the creation of conditions, political conditions, that led to multi-party elections that took place later in 2015. Now, the Sankara, what was interesting about the rebellion in 2014 was that photographs, images, posters of Thomas Sankara resurfaced throughout the country. So it looked very promising and politically that, okay, the masses want to reinstitute the revolutionary politics of the Thomas Sankara era. There was a formation of about 10 or 12 different Sankarist political parties, and they united together during that time period. But they could not win the elections. They did not win the elections. In fact, the person who won the elections was very much closely aligned with the West.
So that's quite fascinating. And
yeah,
so then talk to us about Burkina Faso's history during the early 2010s. So Blaise Compaoré was overthrown in a coup, as you mentioned.
yeah.
And you said that what led to that and what led to that was people grossly not happy with his pro-Western politics, his policies. And even though the Western puppet did a lot of the bidding of French imperialism and other Western imperial and neocolonial governments, did the various leaders who governed after him more or less continue Blaise's African capitalism. The leaders during this period were Honoré Traoré, Yakuba Izakazida, Michel Kafondo, Roche Marc Christian Kabore, Paul-Henri Sandogo Damimba, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing their names correctly.
The screen froze.
Oh,
yeah,
oh.
froze.
Okay, hold up. One moment, folks. Okay, is everything working now? Uh-oh. Hold on, folks. Sorry about that. There is some we're having some internet problems. We will be right back. Oh, actually, okay, we're back. We're back. Okay,
Yeah,
so okay,
I can hear you now. Yeah, it
okay,
froze for about a
okay.
minute or so. Yeah.
Sorry about that, Abayomi. Okay, so
Okay.
anyways, so let me repeat my question. So Blaise Compaore, so talk to us about Burkina Faso's history during the early 2000s and 2010s. So you already sort of talked about that, and Blaise Compaore was overthrown in a coup, and you said that what led to that was his pro-Western imperial politics. Uh,
Exactly.
now, even though he was overthrown in the coup, a lot of the leaders that the various leaders who governed after him, did they more or less continue Blaise's African capitalism? And the leaders during this period were Honoré Trouri, Yakuba Isaac Zida, Michael Kifonzo, Rocha Marca, Christian Kabore, and Paul-Henri Sandogo Dambimba. No, Damimba. I apologize, folks, if I'm pronouncing their names incorrectly. How do you assess the legacy of these heads of states that also ruled Burkina Faso?
Yeah, Mark Rocher Christian was horrendous. Even though he got into office in 2015 with a mandate to carry out monumental reforms, that was not what happened. So the conditions continued to deteriorate. Also, after the overthrow of the Jemahadiya in Libya in 2011, there was the spread of jihadism in North and West Africa. So in Mali, for example, there was the flare up of the Tuareg question, but also other elements were brought in.
Excuse me.
Who were allied with Al Qaeda and ISIS. And some of these groups were armed, obviously, by Western intelligence agencies to justify their presence in West Africa. We talked about in earlier episodes the formation of the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, in 2008. And their first major project was the overthrow of the Libyan government and the murder of Colonel Gaddafi. And after that, there was the proliferation of weapons and funding for these jihadist groups. So they spread to Mali, they spread to Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad. The situation worsened there as well. So the security situation became precarious after 2015 when this purported civilian government came to power. So the security situation continued to deteriorate for a number of years after the enactment of this multi-party election and the ascendancy of a civilian government in 2015.
And did all those leaders I mentioned more or less continued the unpopular policies of Blaise Compaore, African capitalism in a nutshell?
Yes, they did. They did continue all the way up to 2022, when there was another military coup d'etat because the security situation was becoming unbearable. But the military leader who took power, the first military coup in 2022 that took power, did very little to improve the security situation inside the country. This led to the ascendancy of Ibrahim Traore.
Yes.
Who,
Yeah. So now talk to us about Burkina Faso presently. So the country is currently under the military rule that ousted the leadership of Damimba. The current leader of Burkina Faso is Ibrahim Traore. Yes, and so how are you and fellow Africa Solidarity voices and organizations assessing his leadership so far? And is he a heir to Thomas Sankara? Do tell us all about him and what led to him getting to power, and what's been his response during this African Spring in recent years in Sahel and parts of West Africa, which has been rebelling primarily against French neocolonialism. Correct.
Yes, there's a strong anti French anti-neocolonial atmosphere that exists in several African countries, particularly in the Sahel region. And you could see that particularly in 2022 when Ibrahim Traore took power. There were huge anti-French demonstrations. People also, another element of this, people were flying Burkinabe flags, but at the same time, they were flying Russian flags. And why was this? They wanted to form alliances with the Russian Federation for security purposes. They were tired of the so-called Sahel G5, which was a French-dominated grouping that brought together the AES states prior to their signing of the Liptako Agreement, the Guarma-Liptako Charter, which was signed in late 2023 and early 2024. Yeah, so the whole idea was to abolish French influence, to get the French troops to leave that part of Africa, and to form an alliance with the Russian Federation for security purposes. And that's what has happened over the last 3 years. And Ibrahim Traore is viewed as I wouldn't say reincarnation, but a continuation or reemergence of the legacy of Captain Thomas Sankara. Traore, according to reports, had one point belonged to Marxist study groups in Burkina Faso. And a lot of his rhetoric and addresses to his people and to the international community are heavily anti-imperialist, anti-French. So that is the current situation there now. Although the security issue is still critical because with the French being forced to leave and not being able to overthrow the government in Burkina Faso, not being able to stir up mass dissent inside the country, they in fact have drawn the hostility of U.S. imperialism and French imperialism. For example, the former commander of the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, man by the name of General Michael Langley, last year attacked Ibrahim Traore and the Burkinabe Revolution, saying that they were using revenues from their gold deposits to fund their own personal priorities, which was a lie.
Yeah.
Now, I've read recently that he had taken that statement back and apologized for it. But the positive thing about that statement is that it mobilized people internationally in defense of the Burkina Faso and also the entire alliance of Sahel states, the AES. Last year, there were huge demonstrations in defense of the revolution. On April 30th of this year, there was a whole international day of action in defense of Burkina Faso. So they have sent delegations to the Russian Federation. There was a joint summit several months ago between the AES states and the Russian Federation. So they've been sending weapons. They've been involved in military training and intelligence assistance to Burkina Faso to stave off the Western-backed efforts to overthrow the government that exists there right now. And that's clear based upon what happened in Mali, maybe neighboring Mali, which is also an alliance of Sahel state member. It was discovered last year that the US-backed regime in Ukraine under Zelensky was actually sending weapons and to these rebel groups. Now, these people are supposed to be Islamists. They're supposed to be jihadists. So why is a Orthodox Christian oriented government and society of Ukraine sending weapons to jihadists? That's because they're in the same pay as relates to U.S. imperialism.
Unbelievable.
So
wow.
it provides more evidence that the US imperialists and the French imperialists are behind these jihadist groups who are causing havoc in West Africa and parts of North Africa. And it also, the fact that these wars continue, these attacks on civilians, on women, on children, on government institutions, they are continuing. And the fact that they do continue provided a rationale or justification for US imperialism to intervene. So they had all these joint military maneuvers and operations, joint training exercises between even former French colonies like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, along with the French military as well as the US Pentagon. So a lot of that is being disrupted right now. The AES states have left the Economic Community of West African States, which is closely allied with the West. Remember that back when the revolution occurred in 2023, July 26, 2023, in Niger, they were threatening the Nigerian government, which at that time was chair of ECOWAS, was threatening to mobilize a military force to invade Niger and to reimpose Mahmoud Bazoum, who purportedly was elected as president, but he was funded and financed and coordinated by both the United States and France. So this made the situation really, really bad in terms of relations between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali vis-a-vis the United States and France. So the fact that they were threatening to intervene, and this would have had to be a US and French-backed invasion. They would have to supply the weapons, the logistics, the cover, the aerial cover and the intelligence coordinates to carry out aerial bombardments of the people in Niger, a very poor country, but a very rich country in terms of resources. They have gold, they have uranium. And some of the situation with Burkina Faso, they have diamonds there and other metal and mineral resources. So yes, this is what happened. And as a result of what happened in 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger decided to break away from ECOWAS and form the Alliance of Sahel States. They signed the Latako-Gorma Charter. That's a region where all three of these nation states enjoy a similar border. So yeah, this is what happened. And ECOWAS, when they realized that the AES states were serious about breaking away and terminating their connections with France and the United States, then they wanted them back. They invited the AES states to come back into the ECOWAS fold, which so far they have refused to do. So that is the situation right now in the AES states. We have other countries that claim that they want the French troops to leave as well. And that is even Cote d'Ivoire, which is very pro-French under Ouattara, Alassane Ouattara, whose government just recently has disqualified the opposition parties from even participating in the elections. And Ouattara is running for yet another term of office, which he said he would not do, and which is even against the Constitution of Cote d'Ivoire. So that is the current situation that is going on right now in West Africa. It's still very strained. But what's positive about it is that it is shed light, international light, on the contradictions of military involvement by France and the United States in Africa. These interventions have done nothing to stabilize the situation and to enhance the security apparatus of these African states, which they said initially was the purpose of AFRICOM.
Yeah.
But what it has done, objectively, the security situations have worsened. The rebel groups have gained more strength and are carrying out more atrocities throughout West Africa as a result of the presence of Operation Barkhane, which has been liquidated and the G5 of the Sahel, which has also been liquidated. So both France and the United States are in a very difficult position right now. All they can really do at this stage is to fund these opposition groups, to arm them so they can further undermine the revolutionary governments that are emerging today in the Sahel region.
And before I get to my second to last question, it's also important to mention this. But Ibrahim Traore also has given justice to the late Thomas Sankara and his descendants, his family. There was a trial. It was done in absentia because Blaise Compaoré is in exile in Ivory Coast, which, as you mentioned, is very pro French, and he was found guilty of being involved in the coup and the murder of Thomas Sankara. But he's not been sentenced to jail yet because he is, in exile and so forth. You already mentioned that that under this current government of Burkina Faso, that they're having closer ties with the Russian Federation. So my
very close.
So my second to last question is can you tell us a bit more about Burkina Faso and BRICS and any historical relations with some in BRICS that are continuing and will continue to be good, depending on if Western imperialism is able to sabotage it?
Yeah, the growth of BRICS is phenomenal. And there are many countries that want to join, but are not in a position right now to join the Federation. But I'm certain that with the AES states and their alliances, security and political alliances with the Russian Federation, that they are looking forward at some future date to join the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa Plus summit. They just held a meeting in Brazil several weeks ago. And as a result of that, Trump has been going mad. He has imposed 30% tariffs on India. India government, which has been favorable and friendly to successive U.S. administrations. I saw the meeting between Trump and Modi, the Prime Minister of India, and Modi did not look happy at all. And Trump said that because they're buying Russian oil, he's going to slap them with 30% tariffs. Brazil, I believe, now is up to 50%. A country like Lesotho in Southern Africa, with about 2.5 million people, had been hit with a 50% tariff rate. Now, this is a country that had been specifically designated through the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, from 25 years ago, to have duty-free imports into the United States. They have built textile factories, garment factories in Maseru, the capital of Lesotho, and they were importing these goods into the United States duty-free. AGOA next month could be abolished by the current Congress and the current White House. And the economic situation is deteriorating in Southern Africa as we speak. A lot of those people in Lesotho, for example, have been laid off of their jobs. They're not working. Over 55,000 people. South Africa, too, because of the tariffs and other issues, are going to be faced with even more economic difficulties. So yes, the Russian Federation, which they attempted to bring down, even under the Biden administration, we remember they imposed unprecedented draconian sanctions against the Russian Federation, thinking that the economy would collapse, that people would rise up and overthrow the government of Vladimir Putin. And just the opposite has happened. Exactly. Their attacks has built more support for the Putin presidency, and the economy in Russia has been strengthened because they require trade to be done in the Russian ruble. Trump said he was going to end the war in Ukraine, the special military operation launched by Russia in February of 2022. He said he was going to end it in 24 hours. The war is worsening as we speak. He has, in fact, pledged to send Patriot missiles to the right-wing neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So this is what's going on right now. So BRICS is an alternative to the Western Alliance, for example, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and others, the G7, and even the G20 now, since South Africa is a member. I don't think they're going to show up at the upcoming meeting that's going to be taking place. So these are alliances that are being formed internationally, and it's causing a lot of concern on the part of both capitalist-oriented ruling parties inside the United States.
Exactly. And last question is, as a Pan-Africanist leftist and anti-imperialist, which is at the core of Pan-Africanism, what's been your assessment and what should be the response of other Pan-Africanist leftists and people who do solidarity work with Africa and anti-imperialists more broadly with respect to Burkina Faso presently?
Yes, people should support them, and they have been supporting them. There were demonstrations all over the United States on April 30th, even here in the city of Detroit, in defense of Ibrahim Traore and the AES, and people should continue to support them. What has happened in Russia is that their military apparatus has been altered. The Wagner Group, for example, has been largely liquidated. And they established what they call the Africa Corps. And even in the Central African Republic, where the Wagner Group had been active over the last several years, the Russian Federation, from what I understand, I read the other day, they're asking to have the Africa Corps become the main military training institution inside the Central African Republic. So the Wagner Group, whose leader, there were problems with him in 2022, was abolished by the Russian Federation, and they established another military external training apparatus, which is working in various African states on the continent. So yes, I think the alliance between the AES and the Russian Federation is essential during this particular time period, because there are so many efforts underway to stage another coup in all of those states, whether it's against Assimi Goïta in Mali or against the leaders of Burkina Faso and Niger as well, the CNSP government in Niger. So they have to be concerned about their security, and they have to be concerned about reshaping and reforming the national economies of all those three AES states.
Well, here's hoping that the revolution that was sabotaged and interrupted when Thomas Sankara was in power is able to
yes.
Is able to come alive again, and and advance, and hopefully with the other African nations, particularly in West Africa, that has to happen throughout the continent. But hopefully, with that region of the Sahel states, it it is able to advance because you mentioned actually that Thomas Sankara, one of the reasons why he wasn't able to advance his African socialist revolution was because he was quite isolated, which is not the case with the current regime of Ibrahim Traore. Correct?
Yes. In fact, there's tremendous popular support internally, regionally, and internationally. And I think this is important because all of the 55 member African Union states have no other choice except to move in this direction. Because the neoliberalism under Biden, for example, or Barack Obama, still led to destabilization. It brought about a decline in the economic well-being of these various African states. And they have continued to have problems related to security issues, the funding of these jihadist groups and separatist groups, which are done by the Western imperialist countries. So they have to move towards greater unity, self-sufficiency, and self-reliance, like what is happening in the Alliance of Sahel States. And the question of political parties are going to become important as well, because these are military regimes that are running these three countries. And this provides another avenue for reform, at least in the short term, because you have, that was the rationale that ECOWAS was using to justify a potential military intervention, was to reimpose a, quote, democratic system, unquote. But this so-called democratic system is backed by the imperialists. If you look at Alassane Ouattara, for example,
Yeah.
he's backed by France, he's backed by the United States, and he's doing all types of anti-democratic maneuvers to maintain power inside the country. So when we say democracy, we have to be clear. You know, is it bourgeois democracy or is it revolutionary democracy? And those are the two different types of democracy. You cannot strip democracy from its class characteristics. And that is going to be the major challenge going forward in these Sahel states in West Africa.
Here's hoping to adopt the best of both worlds of the Eritrean model and the Tanzanian model. So
yes,
and Neo Sankara. So
yes, Viva Thomas
well,
Sankara. Yes.
Well, we were joined on this All Things Africa edition, learning about the history and current affairs of Burkina Faso with our always wonderful returning champion, historian, journalist, Pan-Africanist, leftist, and all-round anti-imperialist and support of all people power movements, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Check out his work and all of his appearances on 1+1 and subscribe to both Pan-African Newswire and BAR, Black Agenda Reports. Donate generously to them. And don't forget to do the same for 1+1. Donate to us and share widely all of 1+1's content. Encourage others to like us and, again, share and donate. Otherwise, we might have to close the channel. The next country we'll be exploring is Benin. Join us next week for that. And until then, have a great weekend, folks. Good night and good luck. All my best. And it's very good to be back. So all my best until then.